What I get into today is an experience I had last summer. It's called the Aerial Target Engagement Course and was hosted by Greenline Tactical. I've said many times that I consider myself very fortunate. The podcast has provided me opportunities to engage with people and experience things I could have never imagined. I wanted to see and hear from people that have made a true commitment to the thing that they do or represent, and what commonalities or differences exist when it comes to belief systems, values, and principles. In the past, I've often made the decision to invest into an event or a training weekend based purely on a desire to learn a new skill or improve on the ones that I already have. But most of what I chose to do in 2024 was way more about the people I might get to interact with, spend time with, and could ultimately provide me insights to the specifics I just previously mentioned. As I wrapped up the year, I reflected on what I gained from these experiences and thought I'd talk about them a little bit more. And I'll start by giving a little background and insight on one particular event and some of the people involved. Then I'll get into the experience, how and why I chose to approach it, and ultimately what I observed and what I learned. So if you're listening to this and you're not watching, I'd encourage you to go check out the YouTube version because we've inserted a bunch of clips about this particular event to give you some more perspective on what it looks and feels like. It's pretty unique. Let's just say I got way more out of this than I expected. In the summer of 2024, I attended the Aerial Target Engagement course with the Greenline Tactical crew. Don Edwards and Company, which includes Sam Houston, invited me out to join them for this exclusive offering on their menu of annual events. I've had both Don and Sam on the show before, and they're no strangers to the firearms industry. Go back and check out those episodes. This short 2-day course was held just south of Savannah, Georgia, on a gorgeous piece of private property that spans acres and acres of low country landscape. The accommodations on the site were phenomenal and had me feeling like I was somewhere between an East Coast wetland ranch crossed up with like a Napa Valley, California winery. If you attended the Low Country Range Days hosted by Donnie Walker last October, you'll know this spot and how unique it actually is. Greenline Tactical teamed up with Airborne Tactical Training Solutions, which is a Tier 1 provider of tactical helicopter training and support. Now, this course consists of 3 phases over 2 days. Yes, you get to ride on the outside bench seat of an MD 530F helicopter, in full kit if you choose, with as many mags as you can safely manage. Then you get to zoom and maneuver just above the Georgia low country treetops to arrive at several preset still targets on the ground. You then get to experience what shooting and moving from a helo actually feels like. And you get to do it after dark, under night vision goggles, which was definitely the icing on the cake. So here's the setup for this thing. Phase 1, it's a thorough weapons handling session on the flat range. Now, this isn't your typical 4 rules of firearm safety and let's see who the best and worst shooters are so we know how to moderate the class. Nope, there was a careful delivery of information and instruction on what maneuvering and shooting in and around an aircraft needed to look like, how equipment would be configured, and how communications would happen given that shooters were not tied into the onboard comm system. Now, phase 2 is basically ground school on and around the aircraft. There's a lot to know, and I found it pretty fascinating. It gave me a whole new perspective and respect for aviators and the level of detail that goes into maintaining and actually flying these aircraft. This helo is basically a custom race car with overhead rotors, and I wanted to know everything I could about it. And a bonus I actually was able to weasel my way into was actually getting some alone time with the pilot where he was gracious enough to entertain me and my questions, which I'm sure were boring for him, but he was a super cool dude with a ton of experience. Now, one thing to note, a huge emphasis here was placed on rehearsals of maneuvering onto and off of the helo. We analyzed the details a lot. We practiced a lot, and there was heavy scrutiny on all of it, and I appreciated all of it. And if you do this thing, you'll be assigned a flight buddy who rides on the opposite side of the aircraft, and both of you will have a crew member sitting right next to you to provide assistance and help maintain safety. You'll learn there's a bit of choreography to get other shooters off the aircraft and the new ones on. Again, it was very, very rehearsed. So then we moved into phase 3, and this is where it all culminated. You'll queue up based on assigned flight time near the helipad that sits right next to a lake surrounded by wildlife. I got to tell you, notably, as a West Coast dude, I was most intrigued by the alligators. Now, when everybody's locked in and thumbs are up, the pilot quickly lifts off and you're on the way. You get to go dump some mags from about 150 feet off the ground, moving somewhere between 60 and 90 miles an hour. Speed, power, G-forces, adrenaline, the smell of gunpowder and aviation gas, There's a lot going on. Accuracy by volume was my strategy once the shooting started. I'm sure I'd probably get better with more reps, but frankly, being top shooter didn't mean the least bit to me. The whole experience was slightly overwhelming, but I would say like in all the best kind of ways. So when the offer to do this thing came up, of course I was in. Do I consider this training to me? No. Was it fun? Hell yes. Some people might go to Mexico or Las Vegas for fun. I chose Helos and 5.56. You do you. Honestly, in retrospect, I'd have gone for the Helo rides alone. It's for sure some of the most fun I've had with my clothes on in 49 years. And if you're interested in learning more about it, go to greenlinetactical.com for the details on how to get involved. I guarantee you, you will not be disappointed. But one of the best parts about this thing was the downtime, which I'll get into in a minute. You can only get so many people on a Little Bird. Flight times aren't long. It's kind of like riding on a roller coaster at the amusement park. And while you can imagine, there's some finance involved here. Aviation gas isn't cheap, and neither is travel to the event. So those two things alone will definitely limit a good deal of people from experiencing this, I'm sure. But that said, access is only limited by a class attendance cap. Anybody can do this. And it did draw a unique crowd of individuals, including some, like me, that aren't exactly flush with deep bank accounts and lots of free time to spend away from work and family. Also, it wasn't my first time around Don's crew, and it won't be the last. I certainly appreciate them and consider them very good friends, so making this a priority for me was not a hard decision. And, as it turns out, a lot of other very professional people share that same sentiment. These participants are all people and consumers alike, and they're all intimately involved with professional companies that provide others goods and services. Media companies, gear providers, firefighters, cops, bankers, shop owners, dads, husbands, good old red-blooded Americans. So going back to my 2024 intention, I was grateful when I found that these people were open to my questions and conversations and genuinely cared that I wanted to have those conversations with them. And here's what I took away from those chats. As consumers, 90% were not there for a one-off transactional experience. In their own way, each person expressed the importance of building relationships and who you spend time with and experience things with being way more important than the thing you're actually doing at the time. Second, when given the opportunity, 90% wanted to contribute back to the group and experience however they could. Providing support without expectation personally or professionally was certainly a theme. Now, sometimes this showed up as simply helping someone get squared away with their gear, given the uniqueness of the thing that we were doing. Sometimes it was lending specific technical insights to equipment or how to get the most out of the thing that we were doing that day. There were others there with some experience. But it also showed up in the personal conversations I witnessed that centered on the value of family, selflessness, and making sure your buddy was good. The best way for me to relate that would be if you've ever been on a team with a bunch of people where the mission is bigger than the immediate goal, and everyone understands what that actually means. If you can't relate, I bet you've seen the opposite of what I'm saying more times than you can actually count. And if that's you, I'd encourage you to find a new team or a new room, someplace where you can go experience the other end of what I'm talking about. In general, I'd say that what you had in this particular case was a diverse group of people doing a thing that all shared common concerns, interests, and were all in various stages or transitions in life. And consciously or not, it appeared many were very interested in trying to connect and figure out how to be better and do better. Likely not too uncommon when you're surrounded by a group that's been put together by a guy like Don Edwards. And specific to this event, the goals and values that were established for the weekend by and with the group were clearly understood and agreed upon by all. Now, I'm paraphrasing here, but those were basically respect, safety, and fun, in that order. These are general but specific to this circumstance, but also not too uncommon overarching goals in a lot of consumer-driven training or participation environments. And it didn't take long to get that agreement, by the way. And generally it doesn't when those involved understand one another. Both provider and consumer share equal responsibility in this case because both have skin in the game, literally in this case. Riding in a helicopter and handling firearms comes with liability for everyone. The point is, time was taken to understand some basic principles and get some agreement. I'll also add that a relationship building process started long before anyone ever got to this event, which makes this process much easier in a sense, and I think it's important to note. However, what I find most interesting about all this is how this compares to what I commonly observe in the consumer market outside of this environment, and how those consumers interact or talk to and marketed to. Coming from the consumer market perspective, we get force-fed what someone else thinks it's important for us or better for us, and we buy it. This occurs from providers to consumers and consumers to consumers. Frequently, this approach turns into, I know better, you're doing it wrong, and you should do it this way. Now, with no depth of understanding of what either party really wants, needs, or expects, we're often left with searching around until we find something we feel looks or sounds like the right thing for us. Really? You know better? Why? I'm doing it wrong. Well, how did you even come to that conclusion? The answers to these questions are where things can get obnoxious and exhausting. And if you need confirmation of that, just go visit the internet for 5 minutes. Now, here's a couple more questions to think about. How responsible is the provider for not asking the right questions of the consumer? How responsible is the consumer for not asking the right questions of the provider? And what are those questions anyway? Well, my experiences beyond this one tell me that the right questions should be based on two very simple things: goals and values alignment. Simply put, what are the goals and the values of the provider and the consumer? And I'll say this moving forward. By and large, I don't think all consumers are completely ignorant, and I certainly don't think that all providers believe that about their consumers. However, much of the selling and buying behaviors I observe do completely contradict that. As a result, I think a good deal of providers don't need to care about alignment because consumers are telling providers it doesn't matter to them by spending their dollars on their product. Now, I could be very wrong about this, but I believe that by and large, most consumers have a very underdeveloped or perhaps poorly articulated set of goals and values. Consumers and communities are sending a message to their service providers that things like trust, principles, and values are of no consequence, as so long as there's a solid price point, a warranty, and a tribe of people somewhere that disagree with what I'm positing here. So you ask, what does any of this have to do with the aerial target engagement course? Well, it's this. I spend a lot of time around people and I study them. This experience was with a small random population of people, of which 90% represented damn near identical behaviors and attitudes about what's important for them. And I don't think that's a coincidence. And so with that, I propose this. Why isn't there a larger public conversation centered around how to get aligned to be better and do better across consumers and providers? Not just so it can be talked about and agreed upon that it should be better, but instead talked about and actually practiced by the larger percentage, the 90%. Now, I bet 100% of you still listening to this have spent time and money on people and products that fell way short of delivering anywhere near your expectations. And I'd bet 90% of that 100% have done it multiple times and maybe even continue to do it. Why did that happen? And why are you still doing that? Well, I might assume it's because you've never really addressed the goals and values alignment question. And the funny thing to me is that if people simply pause and observed a few things for more than 15 to 30 seconds, often the answers to the alignment question would become pretty apparent. Sometimes it might not be so simple. You might need to ask yourself and whoever you're observing a few questions without having a preconceived idea of what you want or need to hear. Just listen and observe. It's the basis for critical thinking. Anyone that's concerned with wanting any kind of alignment with you should want to have that conversation with you, in my opinion. And here's the thing, you might not be aligned, and that's okay. Move on to someone that is, because I guarantee there is someone you can align with, and you will find them if you're committed to finding that. Now, I committed in a way I found helpful for me, and it's just so happened that it turned into a podcast. I am not suggesting that you do that. I'm just saying it started as conversations that in almost every case I had very little depth of knowledge about. But it was just as important for me to understand who the provider was beyond the thing I sought them out to provide. Now, if none of this is important to you and you just want to be sold, then obviously do that. It's a way simpler route. But I honestly think it's the most expensive route beyond the realm of finance. I've learned a ton along the route I've chosen, and I regret none of it. And to be clear, my intention with making these conversations public has been solely directed at helping others, just like others help me. It's how I met Don Edwards, Sam Houston, the crew, and the other like-minded people I had the good fortune of speaking with and learning from at the Aerial Target Engagement course. All of what I'm talking about takes a lot of investment of time, energy, and yes, money. Those are real things that matter if goals and values matter. For Don, his team, the folks they surround themselves with, those things clearly matter to them. Or whether it's training, gear, equipment, experiences, or whatever, I would guess people want the best value for the money and time they spend to get it. That said, values and value are not the same things. Don't make the mistake of confusing the two, and understand where the importance of each falls for you, specific to your goals and your very specific needs. So if any of this has you contemplating things maybe a little bit differently, here's a final thought I'm going to leave you with. Maybe, just maybe, if people started replacing perceived value with actual values, the things we say we value so much and put so much time, money, and energy into would align and clean themselves up a bit in ways that help us all be better and do better.